From the island kingdom of Numenor all the way down to the halls of Khazad-dûm and potentially the lair of Balrog. Soon, season 2, Balrog, maybe later on. I didn't think they were going to play that card so soon. We will talk about it. We will talk about all these different storylines in episodes 4 and 5 of the Rings of Power right here on Casterly Talk. I, as always, am your host, Alden Diaz here. Hello. Hello to everyone watching. Hello to everybody listening after the fact on the podcast feed. Lauren's here in the comments. Hello. Can't watch live. Can't wait to listen tomorrow. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it. Let us know what you think. Leave comments or hit us up on Twitter at Casterly Talk, whichever direction I'm pointing here in the mirrored image. We'd love to hear what you think of either of these episodes. Brennan Marf is here from Page Turners. Hello, Brennan. Hello there. You awesome people. This show is great. And I love it. I agree, my friend. I am adoring this show. I have a couple note cards here. So if I'm looking down at any point, it's just because I wanted to sort my thoughts between episodes 1 and 2. Or 4 and 5, rather. 1 and 2 of the ones that we're discussing tonight. 4 and 5 overall. Apologies, everybody, for the fact that there wasn't a solo, singular discussion on episode 4 last week. It was super chaotic. And then at the very last second, real life family plans changed and I ended up having to babysit, and so it was a whole thing, but everything's fine. But very happy to be here. Thanks as always to the illustrious Ken Knapsack, our creator and executive producer, for leaving me the keys so we can do these Rings discussions. Tonight is going to be one of those very casual, very laid back episodes, and there's a very strong possibility that it might just be me and you, this bottle of water, this bottle of great value purified drinking water, not a sponsor, probably nowhere near as good as the water in Numenor. A storyline which was particularly enraging this week. Jared is here in the comments. Hello, my friend. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be talking about 2 episodes today. I want to make sure that we credit those appropriately. We're going to be talking about episode 4 of the Rings of Power season 2, called Eldest, which was co-directed by Louise Hooper and Sana Hamri. Apologies on pronunciation if it's Hamri. Written by Glenise Mullins. And then episode 5, Halls of Stone, co-directed once again by Sana Hamri and Louise Hooper, written by Nicholas Adams, who I believe wrote episode 6 of season 1, which was Udun, which was just fantastic. So this team obviously cooking, as we say now, everyone's cooking for the entire season thus far. I can't believe we're already this far into it. Already 5 episodes, only 3 more. That's just one of the dark downsides of the streaming era, that we can have a show that is this good, and then all of a sudden, wow, we're already past the halfway point, and we're trying to talk about all of our feelings and get everything out there. And if you're a podcast or a live stream show like this one, it is sort of like a mad dash to say everything that needs to be said and all these things. But like I said, going to be casual. Might maybe just be me. Unfortunately, Andy's out sick. Nikki is at the Lego Star Wars premiere for the new specials. Ken is busy being Ken. He might be off in Rune with Tom Bombadil, learning about trees, learning how to control all of his powers, because he probably is some sort of reincarnated immortal being. And hit up Ace and all these different people, and it's just such a chaotic time doing these on Thursdays. I prefer to doing them on Sundays, like we do for House of the Dragon. I like this more, but at the same time, it is a work night, and so it's a whole thing. Fucking Nikki's right. It's true, Jared. It's true. No, it's great. I wish I was out there and we could hit up these things together, but alas. Will McLean is here. Hello, Will. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. Really enjoying this season. Going back to last week, Galadriel was great, and this week, Kemen is the worst. Look, let me just say for the record that I don't get like visibly angry watching things, because it's like I like storytelling, and it's like I understand the contract that is such, the social contract between me and the show, that it is going to make me sad, it's going to make me angry, it's going to make me feel things that I want to feel, it's going to make me feel things that I don't want to feel. And so a lot of the times, like, it takes an immense shock or something to make me be like, God damn it, screw this guy, like it, whatever that is. I got there this week. It doesn't happen often, but I definitely got there this week with this 5th episode. And, we're 5 minutes in, almost 6 minutes in, I should say. Of course, full spoilers. If you're just joining me right now, full spoilers. If you skipped a little ahead because you just don't want to listen to the intro of a YouTuber, which I do understand and empathize with, I again want to say full spoilers because we have to talk about a major character death, or I guess major for us. And if you're paying attention to the heroes, it's not like he wasn't a main character, but meant something so much. And yeah, I Jared with a world news comment, random, but I would like to thank the Orange Man, one of the real life orcs, for giving my new punk band our name, Concept of a Plan. Yeah, I'll tell you, if you join us tomorrow on at the time of this being live on Anytime with Ken and Alden, plug on Ken Knapsack's main channel, on the Anytime channel, our main channel, then we will absolutely be talking about concepts and plans and things of that nature. But I want to start with episode 4, Eldest. I do want to blend these around. Luckily, because of the nature of the show, it's a thing where not every episode of the Rings of Power features every storyline, and so you sort of have across these two really a picture of the show, with Eldest featuring the rune stuff, and then this one doesn't, and Eldest has Arondir and the Ents, but it didn't have storylines that this one has, like Numenor. So we're bouncing around. I'm going to make sure to hit as many R's as I can. Numenor, rune. There's no R's like that in Tom Bombadil, unfortunately. Tom Bombadil just sounds like a guy that you just might know. And I do love him. I love him. And I think that his execution is great. And honestly, let's just start there. Because in episode 4, Eldest, it was the long anticipated debut in an adaptation, in a live action adaptation like this, for Tom Bombadil, a character who famously Peter Jackson didn't use. And, I've never held him to account for that. Like, I've always understood that, like, yeah, not everything's going to get in, even with the 3-hour movies or the 4-hour extendeds. Like, it's just not going to happen. You don't need it. I think they proved you don't need it. Need used very loosely, of course. Obviously, we don't need any of this. But in terms of how it lands to finally see the character, it does hit. It does mean something, because it's like a final stone left unturned for the creatives that are working on these shows. One more card for them to play, one more element of this world to engage people. And I thought that the performances across the board for both of these episodes were fantastic. But when we look at the performance that's happening with, in particular, I just want to make sure that I have his name right. Not Tom Bombadil, but the actor that plays the stranger. I am so... I don't know if it's because they look similar, but I'm constantly confusing his name with the actor who played Faramir, obviously in the films. And so I'm just going to double check my work and make sure that that was all set up here. I know Rory Kinnear is Tom Bombadil, but the stranger, Daniel Wayman as the stranger, who is fantastic. And then Faramir's actor is David Wenham. So you could see my problem here. And they also don't even look dissimilar. They got a similar face, similar vibe. Anyway, so I think that the stranger and Tom stuff is great because it manages to be immense, heavy, important, like mythological lore for this world, but without it ever being, I think, like on a television level, without it being intimidating. And they have fun with the fact that even the most diehard of fans don't ever really know for sure what his origins are, what the details are of like the scope of his abilities, or his place amongst the godhood and the pantheon of different mythical beings of this world. And it's all kept really, really vague. And Rory Kinnear's performance is full of life and it's full of whimsy, but it just also has such a focus to it. It doesn't feel ever like, oh, he's doing the silly riddle thing to like throw you off the path. I think that the writers and showrunners of the show cited Yoda in an article I was reading, I believe in EW, that was, Yoda in Empire Strikes Back being an inspiration for Bombadil here, where it's like there is a level up here that can be very silly or disarming, or but it's meant to sort of put you at ease, and it's also meant to challenge you and see if you look deeper. And Bombadil has the greater picture of who the stranger is and what the stranger's purpose is supposed to be, as well as we do, because we're bringing our real world knowledge into it, and our clues that we're putting together in our minds that are heavily indicating that this is their version of Gandalf, or Aloran or Mithrandir, depending on how they want to slice that, or if they want to introduce all the names, which is kind of what I've been advocating for. I think it'd be really cool if they introduce all the names, and we can talk about that as we get more into his journey. But yeah, they introduced Tom in a way where it's like you get the musical element, you get the poetic element, you get the connection to nature, but you also feel dramatically that this is a major player, that this is somebody whose words matter, whose opinions matter, who has a guidance that they can offer that we haven't had yet, and that can help the storyline. That I love the Harfoot storyline. Now the Harfoot, now Stoor, Rune storyline of Nori and the Stranger and all their associated supporting characters. I've loved it, but it has been the one that has been the most, I think, shrouded in mystery by design. One of the two leads is a mystery. One of the now one of the main villains of the show is a mystery. The whole land of Rune is a mystery. The whole thing about Tom Bombadil is a mystery. They even do the Goldberry tease where you're not 100% sure if she's physically present, if you're not privy to who that is or what's going on. And it gives you so much without giving you too many details, and it lets you do a lot of filling in the gaps. And that's the brilliance of the title Eldest, and that's the brilliance of Tom Bombadil referring to himself as the eldest. And that's all you really need, is that there's a really calm, ancient quality to that. There's something inevitable to it. It's as if Tom Bombadil is addressing himself in the way that like wind would address itself if it could talk, or rock, or any of these things that are just foundational to the world. Eldest. And it's like, and in a show with characters like not just the Stranger, but also Galadriel and Gil-galad and Durin the Third, and people like Celebrimbor or Círdan, like all of these beings that we know stretch back for hundreds of years, thousands of years, several thousands of years. People like Sauron that go back to the First Age and had angelic form, and all these things that we know that the show is fundamentally built on. It's this guy who's just offering a kindness that's like, I am the eldest. And how exciting that must be. Like, I would love to be a kid watching Rings of Power. I would be fascinated by that. And if anyone has like a situation in the comments or anything that that you are watching it with your family, or that you're watching it with a younger audience, I would love to know. Leave that in the comments. Let us know, because I think it would be such a cool thing for a kid to watch this show the way that we watch like the Star Wars trilogies, whichever one you started with, of course, or if you need the way that people maybe at a different time. I don't want to be like advocating for it now, but like Harry Potter and different things like that. I think that Rings of Power would be a great way for people to jump in. And those teases are really, really exciting. And I love the stuff that they taught about power. I love the different quotes that came out of Tom Bombadil. Jared's got a great one here in the comments, like what you're looking for, what you found, like, what you're looking for, what you found, that whole idea, the idea of listening to nature, the idea of being in communication with these living beings like the trees, and how Tom Bombadil emphasizes the identity of these different things, I think is so important that we have this happening with Bombadil talking to the Stranger / Gandalf. I've said this before. I've been calling him Stranger and Gandalf sort of interchangeably now, so just prepare for that. And if for some reason the show decides he's not going to actually be called Gandalf, you can hit me with a gotcha later if you want. But I think that tying that in with what's happening with the Arondir and Isildur and Theo stuff, in relation to the Ents, I think is fascinating, that both of these storylines are emphasizing the importance of all of these lives. Even the beings that are not speaking are still part of the, they're still in the care of the Ents, and they should therefore be in the care of the entire world. And that's something that we've seen across, the Lord of the Rings, across the Hobbit, obviously in all the different iterations of the text and all the different installments and all the works. It's something that, came up at the end of the third one with the eagles, being revealing themselves for the first time in this age to be a participant and to be observing. So eagles and Ents, and the way that the stone has become so important across the Khazad-dûm storyline. The world in all of its forms, sentient and non-sentient, and more sentient than others, like how Ents are, they obviously have language in the way that trees don't, but they are related, they are connected. And I think all of that is extremely effective. Jared's comment here about Stormcrow. Yeah, I would love for him to be called something different by all the storylines. That's my hope. I would love it if with the characters we have, they might have to tweak some things around in terms of maybe the order he gets names or whatever they want to do. I won't mind if they want to change some of that stuff. If like maybe our human characters call him Stormcrow, obviously our elven characters call him Mithrandir, and then maybe the people in Rune and therefore Nori call him Aloran, and or maybe by the end of Nori's story, she starts to call him Gandalf, whatever that is. I loved all that stuff, and I think that Bombadil's introduction was great, and I'm excited to see sort of how that evolves, especially with the imagery that we've had so far of the staff in Gandalf's dreams and how that's leading him down the path. And I think that the talk of tasks here was really important too. The talk of destiny. The thing that really got me about episode 4 overall, that we'll touch on in these other stories, is the fact that it's all about responsibility, who's in your charge, and like what your destiny is. And I think that there's different levels to it. And this one is the responsibility to the world. This is the macro level. This is the biggest thing. And Bombadil emphasizes like, this is your task. And it was, it has to be done by you. I can't remember the exact quote, but it has to be done by the hands that they were put in. And that we all have a destiny to rise to. And of course, not everything's to be taken literally, as is the case with prophecy and destiny and chosen ones and magic and all fantasy. But in Tolkien, like, it's not ever like a direct path toward, okay, and your destiny is to go find the villain and kick their ass. Like, it's not, as we know going into this with either prior knowledge or even just general knowledge, it's not that the stranger will become Gandalf and Gandalf is just going to walk up to Sauron, grab the staff, and blast him. It's not that. But the fight does involve putting people together. And I think that we're seeing not just Gandalf's journey emphasize that, but also people like Elrond, like his journey from speechwriter and herald and sort of middle tier politician, trusted and important, no doubt, and has already had a significant life, but moving into somebody that can maneuver others where they need to be for the great fight, I think is extremely important. And I think that's sort of what Bombadil is getting at here, especially because, as we all know, while these conversations are happening, the girls are missing. Poppy and Nori are gone, at least from Gandalf's perspective. And where are they? Well, as we find out, they are with the Stoors. Now, for those playing at home, there are 3 types of hobbits. And the 3 types of hobbits are the Stoors and the Harfoots. So that's season 1 and season 2. I'm really wondering if in season 3 they'll introduce the Fallowhides. The Fallowhides are the 3rd type, and all 3 of these make up hobbits overall. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think it would be smart, especially because this introduces this added layer to the mythology and to the Hobbit mythology specifically, which is that it seems like they, at least in some way, originated from the Stoors, or maybe the Stoors are the oldest branch. That's not necessarily clear, but we know that the existence of the Harfoot caravan and the nomadic lifestyle and the walking song and all of these things stretch back to this ancestor of Sadok Burrows. And Sadok, who we lost in season 1, was their, I believe it's trail finder, and had been charged with leading his people and moving everybody around to safety through the different seasonal changes. And all of that stuff sort of has new context now, which is that's not just generationally important, but is also really intrinsically tied to where we know that they will end up. That the Shire is not just a place where it's like, hey, maybe one day they'll stop being nomads, which was sort of like the implication of season 1. And there's nothing wrong with that. That could still be a compelling story. But somehow now, well, not somehow, but we know how, but like now suddenly they have taken a story that I think would have been really good and taken it all the way to being fantastic, because it's not just that the Shire enables them to stop being nomads. It's that the goal was never to be without home. The goal was always about home. And it's not just, hey, maybe by the end of the show, they'll stop being nomads and we'll see the first Hobbit hole being dug and it will be cool because we know what's going on. That's enjoyable, no doubt. I would love to see Hobbiton and the founding, but we move over into this notion now of the Shire represents destiny. Like the Shire represents the way that they are supposed to be and the way that they what they were supposed to have, and it represents a promise that was begun but couldn't be fulfilled up until this point. And it imbues Nori with such an emotional importance because Nori has always emphasized that she's not special and that what is her destiny, but she's a helper and she's somebody that can, from her perspective, help Gandalf find what he's supposed to have. And that's true and that's great, but in that she's finding a specialness. Like some people have it just thrust upon them. Some people are born with that. They have a chosen one energy, or they are royalty, or their personal mythology is really rich. And Nori doesn't have those things, but Nori in a roundabout way is now going to help drive her people toward this new destiny. And now, yeah, I'm looking at the comments here. Chicken pork adobo. Honestly, pretty great name. Pretty great name. This show will be more classic than the movie. They expanded the world and every scene looks big and vast. More classic is interesting. Do you mean in the sense of because they have the room to do more, it'll be more representative of all the text by the time it's all said and done? Or do you think that you mean 50 years from now, this might be people's definitive thing? I'm interested in that too, of people that have no exposure to the films at all, either trilogy or the animated movies or anything, or Lord of the Rings online, if they obviously and they haven't read the books, if they're just coming into this, and what they'll think. New characters, I want to make sure I get all of their names right here. So we already had, of course, Poppy and Nori, but then we have Tanya Moody as Gundabale Earthhauler, which is a great name, and we are told do not call her the Gund. And then that was told to us by our other new character, who, in a really interesting turn, was originally rumored to be the Anatar actor. I'm gonna try to find his name. So he's Merrimack is the character's name, and Merrimack is, hold on, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look it up and Google is broken now. He's a Stoor named Merrimack, and he played by, it's Gavi Singh Chera, and he was originally rumored to play Anatar, and oh boy, were people wrong. No, he's an adorable little Stoor halfling. And he was, I think, really, really charming. He adds a different energy. It seems like there's a flirtation happening with him and Poppy, which I think is adorable. But he also has some of that openness that Nori and Poppy have. He is, even though he is afraid and he is anxious, and you get the idea that they make fun of him and that he's kind of maybe the town fool, or maybe he's not taken seriously. That fulfills an important archetype, I think, because it's yeah, we got to have the Pippin of this generation, even though his name's closer to Merry. He does seem like he's sort of the Pippin, even Poppy has to stand up and is don't make fun of him and things like that. Classic, like people will talk about it more than the movie. The movies are overrated. That's a bold take. I don't agree with it, but it is a bold take. Now, in terms of the Goond, I really liked her. I think she's really cool. Again, I love the emotion there. Your earlier comment, Jared, about Nori crying that they don't have a home. Yeah, that really got me. And Markella Cavanaugh is one of my favorite performers in the show. I think she's fantastic. And I love that stuff about home because there's a theme now, expanding, and we're talking about 2 episodes. So it's like combining all of those things together, and looking at all the different storylines, even going back to what Adar wanted in season 1 with, the creation of Mordor and the actual Mount Doom sort of explosion that was this devastating event was about home, and the preservation of home drives Durin down the path that he's going down, both Durins, but specifically Durin the Third. And we've seen sort of what the elves would do for the preservation of home, and all these things come down to that central idea of either trying to find it or nurture it or protect it. And where are you from, and where are you going, and what is owed and what isn't. Those are all fundamental questions of every single storyline, and it's amazing to see sort of how Adar and the orcs can have the same emotional thrust, at least in terms of motivation, that somebody like the Burrows lineage of Stoors and Harfoots had. Like, that's such a unifying force, and I think it does a great job to connect all the stories into one overarching theme, because of course there are stories that are just never going to cross. Like, I don't think Nori's ever going to meet Adar. I don't think that the Goond and Sauron are going to cross paths. I don't think Pharazôn and Arondir are going to meet and things like that. And I'd be happy to be wrong about any of these. I think it'd be really funny, and I think it'd be cool, and that's all great. But to give them a conversation with each other as stories, I think is really smart. So I really, really loved all of that. Extra Cheddar's here. Hello. How's it going? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget, you can always hit us up, Casterly Talk, at Casterly Talk, expelled exactly the way that it looks here on the screen. You can head down into the description, head all the socials, all that, retweet, let everybody know that we're live Thursdays at 10 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to keep going now. Just wanted to do a little bit of plugs. Extra Cheddar says, I'm really hoping that Arondir interacts with some of the other elves this season. I do too. And you reminded me of one of my favorite season 1 moments, which was when the Numenorians arrive to defend the Southlands, and Theo, I think he's talking to Theo, maybe he's talking to another trooper, and Galadriel goes by on her horse, and you can see Arondir, who in the context of his story is this old being that has looked after this area forever, and he's got this dramatic romance, and he's got this burden hanging over him, and the whole season he's had to sort of shoulder this arc in a lot of ways with Bronwyn. But then when Galadriel rides by, it's almost like Arondir becomes a young man again, or maybe even a boy, like seeing a hero. Like, he says, like, the commander of the northern armies, Galadriel. Like, they sell her as like such a larger than life figure, and they've done a great job, I think, with that, with the older elves in general, selling them as different and special and revered. I mean, Galadriel's whole introduction with in Numenor, when she does all her credentials, Galadriel of the Noldor, daughter of the Golden House of Finar Finn, commander of the Northern armies for High King Gil-galad. Like, feels like we're at a wrestling match, and it's like weighing in at X amount of pounds from Valinor. It is really, really hype, and you could feel that come alive. Yeah, some light comes back to his eyes, 100%. And I would love to see Arondir interact maybe with Círdan at some point during this. Like, I think that would be fascinating, because of Arondir now having to look after these people that are right by the water and everything, and maybe Círdan has some relationship with them, with his ships. Maybe he helps. I don't know. Maybe Gil-galad takes notice eventually of Arondir in a more serious way, because he has become a de facto pseudo leader with these men. Although he does refer to Theo as the Lord of Pelargir, so it's like that's possible too. Like, maybe Theo becomes more politically important by default because he's the healer and he's survived these things and he has the bravery and his mom was so revered. And so it's like, now are we going to move Arondir into sort of being like maybe an ambassador for Theo, like represent him in the other storyline since he's a boy and like maybe he shouldn't be on horseback going to and from Lindon and all these other places. I think that could be really interesting. Galadriel is the best character in season 1 next to Bronwyn. Yeah, it's interesting. In season 1, there were so many people I liked. I probably would have gone Arondir, but I also do really love that both those characters. And I've also been a huge Disa fan. Joe is here. Hello, Joe. Arondir seems a little like Turin of the elves. He's always very broody and having bad luck. Yeah, dude's just not having a good run right now emotionally. It's just not been great in terms of the stuff that's going on with him. There's constant loss of the mission of the Southlands, of Bronwyn's life now. His relationship with Theo's on very rocky ground. Seems to get a little bit better here. But I think that, that gave us one of my favorite moments in episode 4 in Eldest, which was the Ents scene. And honestly, one of my favorite scenes of the entire show. We had the great Jim Broadbent as Snaggleroot and Olivia Williams as Winterbloom. Wonderful names and wonderful performances for these two main Ents, who have obviously a legitimate grievance with everything that's going on, very similar to what we see later on in Lord of the Rings trilogy, with the destruction of their lands and the disrespect for the natural world and the disrespect for trees. It was something that was building in season 1. Season 1, we get that amazing scene of Arondir, saying that little prayer and having that moment of tenderness and understanding where he puts his hand on the tree before he knows he has to do something that obviously is not his choice. But it's still his hands, it's still his axe, and he feels terrible about it. And that moment was already beautiful in and of itself, and it said everything it needed to say. But bringing it back here, I thought was fantastic. I thought that was excellent stuff. I thought it was so telling of the themes of growth and of the themes of understanding. If one of the overarching themes of this entire piece, the entire show, is home, then understanding and communication is another huge one. I mean, that's everything. That's everything with Elrond and Durin. It's proven to have been everything with the Numenorians as they relate to the low men of Middle Earth. And it's essential here too. And I think that everything that they get into with that, with forgiveness takes an age, and everything that Winterbloom is saying about what they've lost and what she's lost and how long she's tended to this, and that Arondir owns up to his crimes. It's not based in deceit, it's based in tenderness, and he's not standoffish, and he allows her the room to grieve and be angry. And they come to believe him because he's willing to put in that work. It doesn't mean that everything is just good, but the forgiveness takes an age. And then Arondir making this promise of like, well, we'll protect this, and like we're willing to put in the work for it. And we're not going to say, but it wasn't our fault, or, oh, I was forced to do it, or anything like that. It's like, that's all context for later. And that's context for us. And that's context for the characters, for their own souls. But for the relationships, it's like that's key, because there are people and there are certain classes, and there are, in this case, species and fantasy races that are going to pay more than others. That's just how it is in our world. And it's how it is in this world, that there's the fighting up here, and then there's these people that are always going to get the initial blowback. And yeah, of course, in the context of this world, it's the trees. It is the trees. And they're going to be on the front line of this, whether they want to be or not. And to have that theme of forgiveness, I think, was extremely powerful, especially because Arondir is coming from a place of recent emotional failure, from his perspective, like a massive loss that he's internalizing, a fractured relationship with Theo that he's internalizing. And I think, even though this was one particular thing that he had been forced to do that he felt bad about, and therefore contributed to an overall problem, he is at a place where like any type of unburdening, I think, is like sort of like a microcosm of sort of the whole journey, which I thought was really, really powerful. And also, the Ents looked fucking great. Like, the special effects in this show are incredible. Like, we'll never know the exact numbers, but I believe when season 1 was coming out and we knew sort of the deal and how it was going to be a 5 seasons, like I think it's like $1 billion for the 5 years of it, and it's like, yeah, it looks gorgeous, and these effects are great, the performances are great. Joe says, I'm anticipating an Ent versus Troll fight at some point. Joe, I like where your head's at. If we get to see Damrod the Troll with his heavy metal ass theme, the Bear McCreary theme, and the screamo and everything, and then Damrod charges in, and all of a sudden he's met with trees, I'm in. I'm here for Trolls versus Trees. Trolls versus Trees sounds like it could have been the new Plants versus Zombies, but alas, I don't know how to develop apps. So anyone who knows how to develop an app, you can have that one for free. Just make sure you cut me in and cut in Joe. It was his idea. Extra Cheddar says, I loved the forgiveness theme in the Arondir Isildur plot. Really mirrored the perspectives the elves had on the Southlanders in season 1, and Arondir's cutting of the tree. Yeah, 100%. A great call on the elves and the Southlanders and the elves and human relationships in general, especially as it was a deciding factor in Farazan's coup and continues to be a deciding factor in episode 5 with everything with Earian and with that just rat bastard Kemen. All of that comes from this lack of willingness to forgive. It comes from not wanting to have these conversations that Arondir is willing to have with others. And it comes from isolationist mentalities and bitterness and jealousy. And I think you can take the way that Arondir and the Ents talk to each other and the way that Farazan talks to his son, and you could have those as two separate ends of a spectrum of openness, of a spectrum of emotional maturity. And I think that's such brilliant character work to see, for Farazan to see this great tower that was built that you could only glimpse from the highest heights, and it represents, probably in its pure form, achievement and like the high opinion that the gods had of the men that helped in the first age, and all these things that we know that Numenor is at its best, and he sees it as an insult, and he sees it as something that emphasizes why we should be fighting back and why we should be going after these elf lovers with their elf stones and their old language, and we're gonna defile their temple and disrespect their holy man, and just like all these different things that come from a lack of ability to listen, a lack of an ability to reason, a lack of an ability to understand, or a lack of or just not wanting to do those things. Lack of ability or lack of reason, sure, but you don't want ability. You don't want reason. You don't want to get out of the situation in the way that Arondir and Isildur do. Isildur is a great call too in this regard, because he, as we know, like this is when your overall knowledge plays into it. Like Elendil and Isildur are going through these challenges, and they are the key men, the key, not men gendered, but man, the race. Like these are the two key players for this entire world that represent sort of their species in the great fight, and they have this relationship to others that is blossoming and is showing that they, especially Isildur, hanging out now with an elf and hanging out with this not low born, but this low man community, and the Estrid and what she represents, and like, is she on a redemptive arc from maybe being one of the people that worked with Adar, or was that forced upon her? We still need more context there, but we're seeing that forgiveness and that openness and making connections and opening up about loss and being vulnerable is starting to shape Isildur. And we talked about this in our coverage of the first 3 episodes. Like, it's making that character more tragic than simply he was a proud prince and he got corrupted, which is like already good for the metaphor of Lord of the Rings. It already works for what it needs to work for. But actually showing like, God, this guy was great, and this guy's influences, like by the time he falls, if they, however they depict it, if they straight up do the Elrond Isildur, Isildur, cast it into the fire. Like, if that stuff happens in season 5 of this show, we'll remember like, oh God, this was the guy who talked about his mom and the guilt and put Theo on a better path and had friends like Arondir and like was better than the Farazans. He was better than them. He wasn't in it for himself. And that, I think, lands so much. And that's why the theme of forgiveness and the themes of connection and communication are so, so important. Joe has a comment here about Damrod's theme. Oh, I didn't know the lyrics. Damrod's theme song has great trollish lyrics. Rips meat from reeking dragon bone, troll gnaws on skins, raw shanks and shins, no friend of kin to call his own. That's badass, honestly. Make that my wrestling entrance music. That's fantastic. Great call. Thanks, Joe, for emphasizing those lyrics because it's awesome. Extra Cheddar says, I hope they expand more on Elrond to Isildur friendship to make it sting that much more. Yes, that is one of my biggest hopes for seasons 3 and 4, and so on. I am dying to get them together in a storyline after Eregion. I think that would be a fantastic way to go. That should be the next pairing. Hell, give me an adventuring party for one of these storylines that is Elrond, now a tested leader, Isildur stepping up, Arondir stepping up. That's a dude's rock fellowship if I've ever heard it. You can throw Theo in there. That's fine. You know, Theo, you can come. Theo could honestly probably use Elrond in his life. You know, Elrond who has lost both parents and has had a complicated relationship with that sort of thing. I think that would be really valuable. Going back to just episode 4, just to talk a little bit more about it, just so I make sure that we're not missing anything from there, because we are obviously combining a lot of the conversation about 4 and 5 today, which I am happy to do. Let's talk about everything that's going on with, in particular, Elrond and Galadriel on their quest. Now, I love the way that Elrond is being positioned as leader here, which I've already sort of touched on. And I love the way that it's forcing Galadriel to realize in a drawn out, subtler way. She's not saying this yet. She's not like, maybe, you know, my role isn't always to be the, you know, the field commanding badass. Not that she's ever not badass, but it's sort of like very early seeds of the fact that like Galadriel is not going to be on the front lines of like the siege of Barad-dûr. You know, she's not going to be there when Sauron falls the first time. She's not going to be there for the Fellowship, you know, the forming of the Fellowship or anything. She's going to have her own realm, which we know her as, you know, the Lady of Lorien. And so it's like, this is sort of showing like it doesn't always have to be you, which was this burden that she's had, you know, the tempest, as she calls it in season 1, that was inside of her. It doesn't always need to be something that comes from this darkness and this grief over losing Finrod and things like that. Like it doesn't, you're allowed to play a role that is more based in the mind, more based in the soul, more based in, again, home. We know that these are people that are all heading toward establishing places like Rivendell, like going to Lothlorien. Like she's going to have a different role, and so Elrond needs to have his room to grow from being politician to more warrior. So I think that that's important, and I'm excited to see sort of how that plays out. Of course, the actual dynamics of that little adventuring section are just great in terms of fantasy. I love Elrond saying like, well, according to lore, it's like, okay, Elrond's on YouTube. I got you, man. I get it. You know, he writes speeches. That makes a lot of sense. Please hold while I sip water because I've been talking now for 45 minutes. Oh, that's good water. Yeah, I think all of that is fantastic. I really think that the Barrow-wights look fantastic. They look really good. Again, incredible visuals, moody, high fantasy stuff, which I love. And I think that the stuff that they continue to do this push-pull with Elrond and Galadriel over the rings makes a lot of sense. And again, colors the stuff that we know later, which I think is really smart and really important. And I think Robert Aramayo is coming into being not just Elrond who defers to Gil-galad or Galadriel and Círdan, but also becoming an equal player, becoming a fourth, you know, elven statesman and leader that we know will have his own dominion over his own home, over his own region, his own. Rivendell's not a castle. Is Rivendell more of a? How would you classify Rivendell? Is it a keep? Is it a small city? It's not big enough to be a city. Sanctuary, I guess, is sort of the easiest word for it. Anyway, you tell me how you would classify Rivendell if you were a city planner, a government official, and you were an elf, I guess. Question from Chicken Pork Adobo, which again, I will have fun saying that every single time. I've seen some posts and articles about viewers that didn't finish season 1, and only half of the viewers of the season 1 premiere watched season 2 premiere. What do you think is the reason? I think a lot of the times, just like on the business level, people love to try things in the age of streaming. And I think that maybe that season 1 premiere got the spike of like people that like really only love the Jackson movies, which is totally valid. And then they tried this and they were like, it's not really like the Jackson movies. And it's not. I mean, it has a lot of similarities to it, but it does decidedly do its own thing. And then maybe you're just like, not for me. You'll have people that maybe were already on Amazon because of what, like Wheel of Time or The Boys or like whatever it was they're watching. And they're like, for them, it's like, okay, what's the new Prime show? Oh, Lord of the Rings. Like they're doing that on TV. And then maybe it wasn't for them. I think, people that just don't like it, which is valid. Like, again, on Casterly Talk on this channel, I'm not in the business of trying to get you to like what I like. I don't care if you dislike it. Like, I mean that respectfully, but I just don't care. Like, I'm here to dissect why I like it, and unpack it. And then if you're a part of that conversation, great. And so I think there's that portion of the fandom that was just like, this is not for me. I think all of those things. There might be families that threw it on and then we're like, this might be a little too dark for my family. So I think all of those things cause early episodes to have viewership spikes that then fall off. And then I think the season 2 audience is probably representative of the audience size that you can expect along the way. Now, if I also do think that there's potential for upswings, like I don't know too much about the business of it, because I don't want to be an executive. I have no ambitions on being an executive. And I also don't pretend to be one like a lot of people do in the YouTube space or like on Twitter or anything like that. I think it's also possible that the siege of Eregion or the fall of Eregion or whatever you want to call it, the sacking of Eregion, that this could be the shows like Battle of the Bastards or Hard Home, to reference Game of Thrones, where it might be event television in the way where everyone's like, oh my God, like Rings of Power. Like it might be that thing that in the wait between seasons 2 and 3 makes people binge the entire thing. And then we might gain new fans along the way. That's a theory that I have too. Not really a theory, it's just a prediction. So I think, in short, I would say that's probably why. There was people that just fell off season 1, didn't come back. But season 2 is still a top 10 show and a top 5 show for Amazon overall, according to them. So they're still all in for a penny, like they're doing it. And from what you hear, just like through the rumblings, like talking to Ken or talking to other people, like Jeff Bezos, for all his faults and for, of course, being objectively pretty evil, is a legitimate fantasy fan. And he, that's something that he is personally invested in. And I remember it was a little bit more of that around season 1. I think they probably wanted to back off of the Bezos press of it all, because, billionaires. But I remember him sort of seeing like the opening sequence being made and things like he paid personal attention to this in a way that he doesn't with other shows that Amazon does. And so I think that they're going to spend the money and they're going to give this its due. And I don't really have worries about it being canceled. They're too all in. Yes, The Last Homely House. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what it's called. Does it just qualify as one home though? Like, would it be considered his home and he just has a lot of guests, or are there like people that own their own houses? I'm asking such dumb. This is like Clerks level conversation questions right now. Brennan Marr says, on a random note, I really like Anatar's relationship with the one elven lady who incidentally looks like Billy Lord. Yeah, she does. And we'll talk about that. I love that stuff too. We'll get there shortly. Extra Cheddar says, I never know how these shows are actually doing monetarily in the streaming age. This little is disclosed. Yeah, all they'll do is occasionally be like, this is one of our better ones. And they only want to ever share that when it is. So the fact that Amazon was willing to talk about Rings of Power is great, because that means that they're not avoiding anything. It's similar to when Disney Plus had banger numbers for Ahsoka, and then they were like, hey, Ahsoka's doing great. You want to get in front of that and embrace that. So yeah, Elrond, Galadriel, really liked all that stuff. I liked all the tension there. And then I loved the ending with Adar, which of course in episode 5, we don't get too much of a follow-up on it. We know he wants to form an uneasy alliance now, but just the way that like he doesn't allow harm to come to her and addresses her, uh, I never know if to say Kenya or Quenya. I'm gonna say Quenya, but the Quenya, like the stars shine upon the hour of our meeting, Lady Galadriel, and I love that because this is the season where we finally got more expanded details on his origin of being an elf of the First Age, of being one of the Moriandur, these people that were initially turned. And I love that being around her, even though she would have destroyed him in season one if had she been allowed to, had she had people like Halbrand not stopped her. Um, he, I think, remembers a bit of who he was when he's near her and when he's around other elves. And I think that, like he had a similar thing with Arondir in season one, like talking about the idea of home. And if someone could remind me where Arondir is from, I forget. I know it was I'm just confusing my elven cities and settlements right now. Where is Arondir from? Let's see if Google's too broken for that. Beleriand. Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you, Google. Thank you, Google, for actually doing something with your now broken search engine. Yeah, I really love that. I love that Adar has a little bit of his original personhood still inside, that he still has a love for his culture, at least enough to speak the language and to use the formalities and all that stuff. It didn't come off as mocking to me. It didn't come off as like villain takes your line and throws it back at you or something like that. It felt really like it came from a genuine place, like it came from a place of him actually wanting to connect on a certain level. I wonder if Galadriel will tell him that Halbrand is Sauron. I think she will. Maybe not in a way that's like super shocking to him. I think now he's probably like assuming that he's been duped, or assuming that the form that, because he had Halbrand. Fun thing to say. He had Halbrand tracked after he left Mordor, and so maybe he's already like become wise to this, or has already made the assumption. But yeah, the idea that Sauron was in his grasp during the actual founding of Mordor in season one in the Southlands, and that they did come to blows, and that Sauron had a spear to his neck in the woods in season one, that might rattle him in some cool ways. It would be cool to see him sort of recontextualize those moments. I thought all that was really cool. Anything else in episode 4 that I wanted to touch on? I just want to make sure that we got through everything here. Looking at all the storylines, looking at my notes, making sure that's all good. The Harfoots, talked about the Harfoots, talked about Tom Bombadil, talked about the Harfoots and their search of the Suzat, which I thought was fantastic, and how that's obviously the Shire based on the art, the prophesized wall art, the cave painting sort of style. I loved that. And then, yeah, talking about Estrid being one of the wild men and having this other thing. Estrid is one of my only like weaker elements of the season that I'm not 100% sure about. Like, it's not that I don't think the actress is doing a good job, and it's not that the writing is bad. It's just that it's one of those things where it's like it's only going to fully play once it plays. And right now it's been doled out in sort of separated sections where it's like what I know about her is very little, and it took a while to get to the little. And so I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, all right. So you're one of the wild men, but like, are you running from them? Are you afraid of them? Were you trying to deceive and then you had a change of heart? Was it always the plan? Was it not? Like, who is this guy? Are you dating this guy still? Do you like Isildur the way he likes you? There's a lot of that where it's like I need them to fully play their hand before I feel fully invested in that. And in a similar way, moving into episode 5. So we had, of course, Eldest. Now moving into Halls of Stone fully. I think that I feel similarly about Earian, where I'm like, I think Emma Horvath's doing a great job, and I think the writing is good. I just don't know. I need to go back and rewatch all her season 1 scenes because I wasn't sure how I felt about her being susceptible to the machinations. Like at first I was like, I don't know if you'd go down this path. Like there's a little bit of like that isolationist sort of like bigotry that's happening here. Not a little bit, a lot of it with Farazan's movement, but a little bit with her. And I know it comes from a place of grief. And then I was like, I don't know, like you sort of helping bully the people and turning on everybody. But then once we saw like the emphasis on like Valandil, like you're my oldest friend, like things like that, and then of course the tragic loss of Valandil, I was like, oh, okay, now I can sort of be like, all right, maybe this will emphasize like this grief is going to shake her out of the shock of her other grief in a certain way, um, and this could be the thing that writes her on the path, or this could be the thing that helps her break her dad out of jail, like whatever it is. Like I do think that like we're about to get a clearer picture of that, where before I was like, God, your lashing out is going kind of almost into a too far of a place that I'm not sure is consistent with the Earian that we saw in season 1, who was more about her apprenticeship and wanting to prove herself in those ways, in ways that were different than Anarian and Isildur. But now I'm like, okay, I do get it. I get where you sort of fit into the Elendil storyline. So those are both situations where it's just like, it's hard to talk week to week about these things with incomplete information and incomplete pictures, because it's like I could be like, I don't know about this story, and then it's like, yeah, because you got 3 more episodes, bud. That's why you don't know about it. And I think that's a big thing with podcasting nowadays, and just like nerd punditry in general, that I know Ken and I have talked about at length, and I've talked about on Octo Radio, my Star Wars show, and Ken's talked about on Force Center, which is just like sometimes I don't know yet is like the point. And it's not a bad thing that we don't know. And you'll get clickbait articles like, why would she do this? And it's like, because characters make suboptimal decisions. That's why. Yeah, Joe, Isildur is going to need a wife at some point. Could be that that's Estrid. Extra Cheddar asks, yeah, sort of tying in with that. Do you think Earian will come around to Elendil? What do you think Earian is trying to find by siding with the Kingsmen other than possible vengeance? I think it's grief. I think it's vengeance. I think it's also compounded grief, because they made it a point to remind us about the loss of the mom. So I think it's supposed to be, and maybe it'll play better now with the context of like the immediate loss of Valandil, because we didn't see her find out that Isildur was gone, or that she thinks that. Like, we didn't see that moment. We got there, we came back to the story in season 2, and the funeral processions were going on for the king and everything. So I think it's important, and this is why I want to go back and watch all the Earian scenes in season 1, is that it's important to remember the full context of her relationship with loss. Her mother is gone, and her mother was taken by the sea, the thing that they are raised culturally to believe is always right. So she has this weird contradictory element hanging over her family, and that none of them have the full picture of, except Isildur, because he knows the truth, which is that his mom died saving him. But she doesn't have that. All she knows is that this sea that's always right took her mom. So something is wrong, I think, to her fundamentally about, from her perspective, about their belief system and its relationship to loss. Then you have her other brother, Anarian, who's just gone and disappeared to this elusive west in the island, that I'm assuming will come up very soon, now that Elendil has no allies and no resources. So I think that, yeah, like she has mother gone, brother gone in a different way, now her other brother gone, and now I think this loss of a friend who was sort of the surrogate brother, and the last thing, and it is more because of her actions, whereas the other 3 were not because of her. This one is sort of because of her and her new friends. I think this will be the thing that like finally becomes the breaking point, and I do think it'll push her more toward Elendil, even if not in belief system, that at least freeing him so that he can do what he needs to do. And yeah, you're right. Like, it's the he wasn't there for her in the grief, and he's been paying a lot of attention to Muriel and what she's going through. Joe's comment here: the Palantir seems to have turned Earian bad. That's the thing, is that like we don't know what she saw too, is the other thing. And it's, the point is made here a lot by Muriel and Elendil that you're not going to see the same things. And does that mean a changing future, or does that mean it shows you what pertains more to you, or does it show you different angles of the same thing? Because Elendil says, I saw myself riding away from the city heading into the woods. She sees the destruction of Numenor. And it's like, who's to say those aren't the same day, the same event? Maybe Earian saw the destruction that Muriel saw and interpreted that as, and I think this probably will be the case, but this is not really a prediction show. But I do think that, like, if she's like, yeah, I also saw the fall of this island, And I also saw it while you were over there doing the thing that you were cautioned by some to not do. So I don't know if it turned her bad so much as maybe like put the fear in her, radicalized her a little bit, and then they come back, and what's the news? Isildur is dead. So then it's like, okay, I'm right. I'm right here. So that becomes the complicated thing. And yeah, she's a member of the family of the faithful. But I think that for this adaptation of it, I think the point that they're trying to drive home is that Elendil's house started to drift away, then he got back on track, and he has Muriel with him, who's, whether that becomes romantic or not, we'll see. But like as an extended member of their circle, getting more back on the path. Anarion seems to be wherever he is, Isildur's brother Anarion, like he seems to have stayed on it. So I think it might be sort of like the house reconnecting with what they're supposed to be, becoming, what you're speaking to. And maybe Earian does have that redemption where she realizes, like, I shouldn't have acted from a place of fear, and I shouldn't have let my grief become poisonous, which is sort of, I think, what that storyline is trying to show us, that grief does become poisonous. You see that with, the people on a massive level of like all these Numenorian soldiers and sailors that were lost in the battle in the Southlands and in the creation of Mordor. They lost all of them personally with Elendil and Earian, and how they lost Isildur, or think they did. We see that with Valandil grieving his best friend and his brother in arms. And we see that, with individuals like the lady who slaps Muriel. And we even see that with Pharazôn and Kevin talking about his dead mom. You get the idea that his mom's probably been gone for a while, based on how he's surprised that Pharazôn's even bringing it up. But Pharazôn twists the knife and stokes the grief. He stokes the fires of that pain. And he's the type of person that is doing things like that to our impressionable young minds, like Earian. I think it's an extremely modern fantasy storyline. We talked about that when we talked about the initial coup in our 3-episode coverage for the premiere. Like, they appropriate these symbols, they stoke fear, they cast blame, they do all these things to undermine a much more qualified woman who does believe in unity and believes in helping. And all they want to do is radicalize. And it still comes from that place of loss. And I think that, like, she might look at what has become of Kemen, because she will put 2 and 2 together and talking to her father that this happened because of him, and therefore by proxy because of her. And she'll realize, like, oh, I can become that. That's not the way. And I think that maybe that's how she'll reconnect, if not directly with her faith, then at least with her empathy and more of her humanity. Brennan has a great comment here. It was pretty heartbreaking to see all that violence and nonsense taking place at a religious shrine. As I'm a religious person, I hate to see the weaponization of religion in any way. Yeah, it was. It's an interesting flip where it's like the radical sort of isolationist, sort of bigots and everything of this world forget the truth, because it's like in the world of Tolkien, we know that all that is real and confirmed to be real, and that the island was gifted by the gods, and like it's not a question so much as like in real life, the battle is always those who believe and those who don't. And in Tolkien's world, it's this battle is more so like those who remember history and truth, and those that choose not to. And the way that they just like disrespect for the sake of disrespect and hurt for the sake of hurt becomes sort of the weapon, becomes the weapon of the moment. And yeah, that was all I thought really effective, and really just made me full of anger. I talked about that at the top of the episode. It takes a lot for me to feel like that, like I want to not punch the TV, but like, man, fuck this guy, like, to get me to that point. And they definitely did with Kemen. And it's good writing, it's great acting. Valandil with a really, really affecting, sad death. He was the one that was there for Elendil in Middle Earth when they thought they lost Isildur, and now Elendil loses him, so he's lost both of his boys in different ways. And now, a kid that grew up with him, a kid grew up around him, and one of his men, someone who was loyal. The scene of them all having to turn in their armor and weapons, and the way that they all stand up for Elendil and call him captain, and bring up the Valar and show their belief and their religiosity and their respect and their faith and their resistance, their peaceful resistance of standing there and saying, like, you can't take these things away. You can't confiscate this. You can confiscate all this. It felt very like Dead Poet Society, like everybody standing, oh, captain, my captain. Like, I think it was definitely probably inspired by that moment. And I thought it was really, really effective. I really, really enjoyed the way that this played. The Numenor storyline is one of those things where sometimes when we get away from it, I get a little bit worried on behalf of the show, not because I'm disliking anything that they are showing me, but sometimes it's like when we don't have it in an episode, I'm like, oh, we don't have Numenor in this episode. Like, shouldn't we get back there? Like, there's so much going on. Then they just hit all these notes whenever they are there and move it along to the next stage. And I also thought the Muriel stuff was interesting in that way too, of like, her way of navigating right now is to not make a decisive move. And like, that'll probably bite her in some way because it's television and we need drama. But it's the idea of like, she's burdened now by trying to navigate this, not just without her sight literally, but like without her sight figuratively, which is sort of the thing, like when a character loses their sight, they lose their sight and they gain their vision, or vice versa, whatever terminology you want to use. It becomes sort of a thing now of like, she needs to reevaluate, but she's reevaluating from the most vulnerable place with having pretty much nothing. Like they say, like, Elendil's men are, he's like, oh, we're still loyal to you. And it's like, okay, but like, not if they get rid of everybody that would dare, not if they take away everything and demote everyone or strip everyone of all rank. So I'm really curious to see what her play is going to be. I think we're about to see more of that island. I think we're going to see cool reveals. I think we're going to see finally Anarion in the show and who's playing him. I think that's exciting. Which storyline is my favorite, asks Chicken Porcadobo. It does change depending on where we are, but overall, my favorite storyline has been Elrond. In season 1, Elrond and Durin, but now Elrond overall. Elrond and Durin, Elrond and Galadriel, Elrond and Círdan was some of my favorite stuff this season so far. I loved all of that. So that I'm really excited for. Elendil's captain moment reminded me of Ahsoka's moment in the final episodes of Clone Wars. Yeah, that was really, really cool. I think, assuming you're talking about the Siege of Mandalore with everybody with the orange paint and how they still recognize her as being their commander. I love that. Yeah, that's a great call. Joe says Kevin is already acting like a Nazgul. Could you imagine this rat bastard becoming one of them? It honestly would be fitting. I've long thought in season 1, before we knew for sure that Halbrand was Sauron, I thought he might be the Witch King of Angmar. I know some people think that Kieran Hines is a Dark Wizard, who we're still waiting to learn more about, that he might be. Then there's one Nazgul who's said to be from the east, that he takes over Minas Morgul briefly after in the books after the Witch King is destroyed. I might have my facts mixed. Could be that. I've also half jokingly said that maybe Theo becomes a Nazgul because he is being positioned as this new leader of men. That could be interesting. But yeah, I think overall, I was really happy with the Numenor storyline this week. Everything, of course, beautiful and emotional. The music, the performance. I think Lloyd Owen, just incredible actor. Cynthia Dye Robinson, incredible actress. Just everybody doing such amazing work. And I'll be really sad to see Valandil go. And I think part of the tragedy of it as well is that, he doesn't even really get to connect because with Isildur again, doesn't get to learn the truth. Isildur doesn't know that he passed, and they're all gonna have to find that out together. And when they put this family back together, they're all going to be on different pages, which I think is part of the tragedy of it. So I was very pleased with everything that happened in the Numenor storyline. Moving over to the Dwarven storyline, got to give a shout out to Disa, one of my favorite characters. I love that she is the emotional rock, that she's the clarity. It's built into the character. It's built into the adaptation of Dwarven women that they've given us. This idea that they are sort of the guiding light of their people, that they have the emotional intuition, that they have the ability to actually connect with, again, home, that idea of home, and sort of have always, as Disa points out, like they've honed this skill over time. And now we have, again, in terms of hubris and in terms of falling susceptible to greed, the first look at what the rings will actually do, and setting up later, which what I love, Celebrimbor calls the strength of the three will lead us to, the redemption of the seven, and we see why they need to be redeemed very quickly with Durin the Third, not becoming so that they're doing a great job conveying the dwarven side of this story. We know men fall and they become the Nazgul, they become the ring wraiths, and the dwarves don't fall. There are no dwarven Nazgul. But it does affect them. They're stout of heart, and they're tough people, and they're really connected with who and what they are. So they don't fall all the way, but it does drive them to irresponsibility and one-track mindedness, and just gross levels of greed, and we said isolationism, like that comes into it, in terms of Durin sort of holding the other kingdoms hostage, if not literally, but like economically and agriculturally. And it's sad to see Durin the Fourth have to watch his father become this bastardized version of himself. As he says later to Celebrimbor, like, greed is not his way. It's never been his way. Like, he's a complicated man, but he was never cruel. And the cruelty and the malice that immediately comes out, I loved the way that they depicted that. The way that they're showing us the power of the rings. We'll talk about what happens with the invisibility later. That'll be the sort of the last section we talk about. I worked, not intentionally, but I worked this in a way where Anatar, Celebrimbor, and everything happening at the Forge in Eregion will be the last stuff that we cover. And I think it is the richest and scariest and coolest stuff. But this stuff is sad because that Durin and all the dwarves at this point, whether it's Disa, whether it's Narvi, everybody has been pushed to a place of desperation. They've been pushed to a place of just wanting to survive in the most literal way. Like, we just want to eat. We want to eat. We want to be able to continue our lives, and we want to be able to buy things and make enough money to be able to go down into this dwarven market street, which is honestly like a top 5 place that I want to be in Middle Earth, at least as it stands right now in the season. I want to go shopping with Disa. I want to go buy stones. I want to go haggle with dwarves. I want to be down there being like, nah, 150 for this rock. Loved moments like that. But yeah, it's a really cool depiction of sort of the slow fall. And like I mentioned at the very, very, very beginning of the episode, they are, as we know from season 1, they're condensing things. We know that about the adaptation. Some people hate that, and respect to you, but like at this point, you just got to accept it. It's season 2. If you don't like that they're squeezing a bunch of stuff together, that's what the show is. It's an adaptation that is condensing the timeline. That's a choice that they're making. Could also be a choice they have to make depending on the legalities of certain things. They get everything approved by the estate, but you got to do what you got to do. That's a much bigger, much more boring conversation. But they are bringing, the Balrog stuff way earlier into the timeline, similar like they did with Gandalf. These are Third Age things that are now being done in the context of the Second Age. And I know some people said, like, maybe it's not the Balrog, maybe it's the someone pointed out in the comments, what's the other creature called? The Kraken-esque creature, the tentacle-y thing that attacks them in Fellowship. So people pointed out it could be that, and that they haven't necessarily delved deep enough for the Balrog yet. And hey, maybe that's true too. Maybe they want to introduce all the perils of Moria that will come later, and I think that could be smart. But regardless, the idea of the Watcher. Thank you, Joe. The Watcher in the water. Everything that's happening there becomes sort of like indicative of like the entire Dwarven journey of like, it's that hubris that's delving too deep that we know about because of Fellowship. Seeing that depicted is really exciting. Joe also points out, Durin revealed that the ring gave him the power to see all the riches within the mountain. It's a good choice for the power of a Dwarven ring. I agree. I think it's cool. It's a good way to depict that, because you need controversially, of course. There are a lot of Tolkien purists that don't like things like this, but like the origin of Mithril is very TV, very cinematic. The flashback that we get with the Silmaril and the tree and how that explains all that. The how the three work, almost like magical Wi-Fi, across the Elven lands to expand the light of the Silmarils from the Mithril, and like all that very TV explanations for that. And now you have another very TV explanation for what's going down with the Dwarven rings. And you get the idea that this will probably be the case for all 7 of these rings. It's giving them the easy answers. It's giving them the ability to bypass all the work. As Disa says, it feels like cheating. And it's more than just you cheating in terms of like speeding up the process and like you didn't have to work for it. It's like cheating on like a spiritual level, and it's forcing them to become these hyperactive like versions of themselves that aren't attentive, that aren't listening. Like Joran doesn't even know what he's saying half the time. He's forgetting that he's telling Narvi, my hand feels heavy and I'm going to take the ring off for a minute. Like he does stuff like that and doesn't even remember it, and is snapping on people and becoming irritable and scaring his son. So all of that I thought was extremely compelling and very sad because we know where it's going. But it's really good storytelling, and the acting was excellent. And as that pertains to our other story, oh boy, everything that's happening with Anatar, or Sauron, as we all know he is, and Celebrimbor at the Forge is legitimately terrifying. It's terrifying because the manipulations are written so well, and it's like we all know where it's going. I'm not going to spoil anything about the fall of the Region, and so people don't spoil it in the comments if you can help yourself. You're watching after the fact, about people's fates and specific events that are coming, but like we all know, Sauron does not get defeated in this age. So it's like we're seeing the foundations and everything that are growing over time. Jared says, I got to bounce all and keep on keeping on. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks, man, for the tip. Super chats, are available. You can always super chat. You can always head to the PayPal link in the description if you want to support the show. There's also a QR code on the screen, this way, that way, that can set up. And we really appreciate it. Thanks, Jared, as always, one of our favorites, one of our longtime listeners and viewers, always hanging out with us for these streams. So I appreciate that. This stuff that's happening with Anatar is really freaky. And earlier, Brennan mentioned the character who looks like Billy Lord, which was a great shout. And she plays Mirdania, who is one of the Smith apprentices. And people didn't know much about this character because she's an original character, but now we've seen like the role that she's serving in the narrative is that she's going to be now the vehicle for Anatar to sow discord in Eregion, to make people think that Celebrimbor is the problem, that Celebrimbor is the one that's losing it, and that Celebrimbor's control over his realm, his respect of his students, the stability in his life, all these things are being chipped away at. And you could tell it's finally getting to him because he can't prove any of his suspicions, which are right. He can't prove any of Durin's suspicions, which are also right. He's being painted as something that he's not, and even he doesn't know the full picture of that, like we, the audience, do. So we now know more than he does about what's been said, and that creates this dramatic tension of like, oh, they're looking at you like you're crazy, and you're showing that you are, and they know it, and it's all this rich stuff, and it's scary because, like I said, they write such a good manipulator with Anatar, and both of the Charlies, both the Charleses, Charlie Vickers and Charles Edwards as Anatar and Celebrimbor respectively. They have incredible chemistry. I was saying this on Twitter earlier. I really hope that they continue to work together for a long time. I hope that they become partners. They should put them in all the best two-man shows. I'm really excited to see more of them as actors. I would love to see them in like a comedy together. I think they have an incredible chemistry as actors. But the brilliance of the performance and the writing is that you can see that like Sauron is not without fallibility. He still has to put effort in, I guess is the best way I'm saying it. I think that like we assume as a pop culture consuming society that especially if you're just like a movies person. Like, and I'm sort of like, I have a foot in both. Like, there's a question here, like, have I read the books? Um, oh, you're starting to read The Hobbit for the first. That's awesome. I love The Hobbit. Um, The Hobbit's one of my favorite books. I've read The Hobbit. I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Silmarillion, I've sort of just like skimmed or like researched. I haven't sat down and done the full. Same with like Unfinished Tales and things like that. So it's like I've had like a Tolkien encyclopedia before. So it's like I'm like a like I would say like level 1 book reader. And then like hardcore fan of the movies and things like that, and the games and the different adaptations. And I love the animated Hobbit, and that's one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. Is that animated Hobbit movie is fantastic. And the Hobbit game that came out for the Xbox GameCube, I had it on GameCube. That game rocked. Where's my remastered Hobbit game? That's my question. And I would love an answer. So please, somebody, let's remaster that game. It probably wouldn't take much. You could release it on iPhone, I'm sure, with the way that the processing power and the graphics. But Anatar, what I was saying is that he's not this all-knowing like thing where it's like he knows exactly what to say. He can see directly into your mind, and like we know he can penetrate your mind and see your things, but like it's not like he knows exactly what to say, and like his plans are always 100%. Like he still has to adapt to situations, which I think is really smart. He cannot, even Celebrimbor realizes this and points this out, like he makes people think that his desires are their wants. He makes it, I think Celebrimbor says, like, you make it seem like it's the fruit of our minds and things, which I think is great, because it's like, you're right, pal. You just don't realize how much you're being played in this moment. But you move over to like these scenes where he's realizing like, oh, okay, so if the ring does do this to Mirdania, and it's like, which I love. I love that they use the invisibility. I love that that ties in. That's a great, like, just like a visual thing for people that know the iconography of Lord of the Rings. They'll be like, oh, okay, so it does connect to this. That's good on that level. But the fact that he realizes, oh shit, this happened, which means she's seen this, which means I can make X play, which will lead me to be able to make this Y play. And like he is also making it up as he goes along within the confines of his grander plan. And that adaptability makes him really scary. Like if he had just been able to bully Celebrimbor into making the 9, great. If he has to guilt Celebrimbor into making the 9, great. If he has to do it without him, great, because he knows he'll come crawling. How am I going to do it without him? Well, let me say these things. How am I going to make sure that the people that are maybe suspicious of me aren't suspicious anymore? I'll use him as a scapegoat. Like, he's able to spin all these plates, and that's just here. That's just here. And it's like, let alone the plates that he's spinning with Adar, let alone the plates he's spinning with Galadriel, the stuff that we know, like he still has his eyes on Numenor. He says that he's afraid of Numenor. It's the only place that strikes fear in him. And like, how great is that, knowing what will happen thousands of years later with Aragorn? There's all these things that are happening that really, really fleshes out Sauron as a character, that he is outright evil, but he is not this like can just walk through it. And like we've seen, he can be killed, he can be beaten, extinguished forever is a different thing, but it's like he is a corporeal being that you can kick his ass, and he does have to put a little bit of work in. And I think that makes him compelling in an entirely different way than he is by the time of Lord of the Rings, when he's non-corporeal. By the time of Lord of the Rings, he's an inevitability, he's an idea, he's a force of nature, and he has a want, but his will is all passive, and it's people like Saruman, it's people like Wormtongue, it's the orcs, it's the ring itself, it's Gollum, that all sort of become the evil forces that are moving the world toward what he wants. But here, as an active player, he's great. Brandon Summers is here. Hello, Brandon. Thanks so much for joining us and for your comment. I think I like the season more than the first, though the first had some awesome moments. Really, really enjoying the focus on Sauron this season. I 100% agree. I think that you're allowing the threat to become more real. And now when we rewatch season 1, and we see Galadriel's fear over this person that she'd hunted, and we got a glimpse of the version that she was hunting with the first age Sauron that gets absolutely destroyed by Adar and all the orcs in the flashback to Forodwaith. It's like, okay, like I understand the threat now. I understand the sort of silver-tongued devil that would have been able to take out her brother Finrod and been able to do all this bad. That would have been, I understand, this schemer that was the number two to Morgoth, the real like Satan figure of this entire mythology. I understand now in a fuller way. Like, I'm seeing him play Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor is sort of like this trial run for the audience of being like, oh my God, I get it. I get sort of like what the danger of this guy is. He will, switch to violence, as we know he will, but like so far he hasn't even had to. And how devastating is that? Like, he's fundamentally, just through these conversations, changed the entire makeup of the entire world. He has influences that extend all the way out to Rune, as we've seen with the Dark Wizard and Bombadil. And then now we've seen how he's able to fundamentally change the way that the Dwarven kingdoms are operating. They already, like, their culture is changing. The place of like the singers, the place of the relations between the seven kingdoms. He's changed the way that the elves are operating, and has caused Gil-galad to sort of have these moments of like his leadership is not called into question, but his leadership is like put between a rock and a hard place of like, what is he going to do in terms of their forces and their armies? It's hard. It's very, very like hard to see it happen, because part of you does root for him. Like, quite frankly, like part of you is like, it's so fun to see the Sauron show that I don't think anyone ever think would ever be made. No one ever thought we were going to get a project like this. Certainly not 20 years ago, not even 5-10 years ago. And now it's like, yeah, this is the villain. This is the guy. And when he does actually get into it with Galadriel, like we glimpse in the trailers that they do have at least one, if not a fight, at least a tussle, at least a face-to-face with his Sauron crown. It's like, he's a bad dude. It's a really bad dude. Chicken Porkadoo was asking, what do I think is a bad part of the show? I don't have like a part that I think is bad. But like, if you're saying, yeah, like for you, it's the Harfoots, like you just don't care for them for whatever reason. If there's something that I'm like least invested in, it's hard to say. It's probably like the wild men stuff at this point. Like, I know it's important, and it was important in season 1 because it set up people like Waldrig, who made the dark choice, made the bad choice. And then it became, and it also set up people like Bronwyn, who came from First Age men lineage, who made the wrong choice, but she was going to make a different choice. And I think at that point, the men stuff, I was like, okay, I'm down. Now there's the storyline of like, there are men that sold out and chose Adar, and I need more from the Estrid arc before I feel confident about like or disliking it. Right now, I'm kind of just like, whatever. Like, I don't really care that there are men in the woods being shitty right now. So maybe it's like I sort of split that section of the story into two. Arondir, Isildur, Ents, all that, hell yeah. Estrid and Theo and the other men, and good and bad, I'm kind of like, okay, like, you're fine. And yeah, the Harfoots are great comedic relief, as Joe says. Brandon Summers says, absolutely, Sauron's machinations incredible to watch unfold. And yeah, I agree that he doesn't need to bother with violence. And that makes him so much scarier. Like, we're gonna get villains that throw down like Adar, and we're gonna get, I think, a wizard battle before the season is over between Gandalf and Kieran Hines' Dark Wizard, whether that's Saruman, whether that's the future Witch King, whether that's the future one of the other Nazgul from Rune. Whatever version of that, I think we're going to see some magic blasting, and it's going to be really, really cool. Just, as I'm starting to wind down, more thoughts on just like the Anatar stuff. I love the direction of all that. I love the performances. Amelia Kentworthy as Mirdiana. Mirdiana. I need to get her name right again. This is so many Elven names, so many things, so many characters and roles. Mirdania. The horror of us knowing that she saw, at least in some form, the Eye of Sauron, whatever the version looks like in this adaptation, difficult to say. Although a lot of the designs that they're allowed to use consistently, they seem to be doing. I mean, we got the Doors of Durin here, amazing, and it looks like it's going to be the same basic shape and outline that has become sort of the generally accepted look across the Jackson adaptations and across different artwork, like John Howe's artwork. The Balrog was straight up the Balrog. Sauron's armor shape has been pretty consistent across the adaptations. So I'm imagining the same Eye of Sauron that we all know. But she describes like this thing of flame and it's just like she sells it all in her performance, and it's so good. And you can see Anatar being like, all right, like, am I caught? Am I gonna have to dispose of her? Am I gonna have to do all these things? And then all of a sudden he's like, wait a second. And if you look at the blocking of the scene, it's genius, because he's like, yeah, and that's why I have to fix Celebrimbor. And you're like, you son of a bitch, because Celebrimbor and him are lined up in the blocking of the scene. When she's talking about what she saw and what she looked at, Anatar is behind Celebrimbor. So it's like, it does stand to reason, not that you need to think about it literally, but it does stand to reason, even visually, that she did probably see, once he says that, like, oh yeah, like, I was looking at Celebrimbor when I saw this thing. And it's such a great, like, he's so situationally aware that it makes him so dangerous. He's so aware of what people's perspectives are, what their station is, what they think, the way that he gets all the Smiths on his side at the end by being like, look, guys, I know Celebrimbor is being kind of unreasonable there. Like, that's a really, really dangerous man. And I think it connects to one of the overall themes of the show as well, which is about information and truth, and about how you wield it. Like, we saw that with the eagle. The eagle clearly arrives for Muriel and clearly is not happy. It squawks at them and everything. But just by turning around and unsheathing his sword and raising it up and getting the chant started, Farazan is able to use that to justify his claim. And all of a sudden, people have seen all they need to see. And controlling the messaging is really, really important. And it's not something that comes up so much in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because at that point, it's like push has come to shove. It is time. We need to get this small group. We need to go do this thing. But it does start to show its, to show up as being more relevant later in the story, with the relationship between like Gondor and Rohan. Like, that's such a big thing of like their perceptions of each other, their perceptions of who abandoned who, and all the iconic lines that we know, like, where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? It's part of what happens later on with Elrond's perception of the dwarves, and how sad that is, that he doesn't think that they care anymore. Perception is really important, and we've seen that Sauron has already been able to weaponize that here, with Myrddina and with Celebrimbor. And Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor, I think, is like my standout performer this week. Him and Sofia Nomvetti, who plays Disa, and his like slow breakdowns and his head and hands and everything that's happening with him, realizing just how quickly the situation got out of control. He went from toasting and, unveiling the doors with Narvi and like, wow, everything's so great. And, oh, do you think I talked too long? And, always patting Sauron on the arm and everything, which, like, you're going to pay for that, man. Like, every time he touches Sauron, Sauron looks so angry. Like, Anatar is very beautiful. He's a pretty man. Ugliness comes out in him. He just looks at his arm like such a slight, just like visceral disgust. And I think that plays really brilliantly. But yeah, Celebrimbor goes. It's like Celebrimbor's like no good, very bad day. Like, you're never really sure how much time passes in the show, which I think is honestly a smart creative choice, to just like let us realize that time's passing. Like, here we see everything that Durin is doing, all the initiatives that he's doing, all the planning, all the places he's told people to dig. We start to see sort of the relations with the other seven kingdoms, and like, you get the idea that like weeks are going by in that. And by the time we get now to the fall of Eregion, as we've seen in the trailers, Anatar's hair is longer. He's got this different armor set up. It looks like, a couple months maybe are passing over the course of this season, which I think is smart. And in that time, though, Celebrimbor has lost all control, and Anatar is, playing every button, every note perfectly, pressing every button, just like plucking at his strings of the deceit, bringing up that like, well, no, you did this, sort of injecting the guilt in, like you sent that letter to the High King, and so that deceit, like you're in this too, in for a penny, in for a pound, buddy. Like I'm gonna go work on him. I'll be down here if you wanna give us even one word of like anything, because it's your fault. Like taking somebody who's so obsessed with legacy, taking somebody who's so obsessed with the way that they're perceived, with the way that their works are perceived, are they appreciated or not, all of that stuff, that becomes so fundamental to his downfall, just because he was not able to realize that there was power in fallibility, that there's a strength in accepting that you are um, allowed to make mistakes, I think is a big thing, because we've seen that like Anatar's final stroke of this particular part of the plan, the final master stroke for this stage of make the 9, of that being the goal, is to be like, well, he just pushes him to the point where it's like, well, confess or get to work. And Celebrimbor's pride won't allow him to confess. And Gil-galad being suspicious of the letter and everything. Again, it's that theme of controlling the narrative and the story and the flow of information and isolating friends from each other. And that's what Sauron is, his ability also is the isolation. Through his machinations, through his manipulations of Celebrimbor, he's crippled the elven defenses, because he's split them. He's made them think that the the Adar threat is potentially the more pressing matter. Maybe they can't do both. Maybe they can't be in both places. They can't give their full attention, like Elrond is pleading, because he now knows the truth about what's happening with the Region. And yeah, I know we as the audience know that there's going to be this Galadriel Adar alliance, which is going to be awesome. I am so excited to see the two of them as a team. Not that I think Adar can be fully redeemed, but I think that like he might be able to go out on the right side after having been a victim for an entire age. So I think that is going to be really interesting. But Sauron has forced them into these corners just by asking the right questions and making the right suggestions. And I think that the show is showing you that that is decidedly the more dangerous type of villain than even an orc or a troll or a Balrog. Maybe not a Balrog. A Balrog is actually pretty fucking dangerous. A Balrog does not need to manipulate you. It'll just cast you into the fires of hell with its giant sword and whip. But that's a different problem for a different episode. I am surprised that I have only taken a few sips of this water, because I've been talking now for almost an hour and 40 minutes nonstop. And like I said, I thought this might be one of those times where none of the usual suspects can call in, but that's fine. I've had fun talking to all of you. I've had fun doing this solo, just monologuing about this stuff. I believe the kids call this streaming. Am I a streamer now? Or does it count if you're on YouTube talking about nerd stuff? Or do I need to be like playing video games or saying dumb shit and giving away money? It's hard to say. But yeah, I found this episode to be extremely effective. The death of Valandil, the ideological death of Celebrimbor, the fact that Durin swears to Disa, I thought was a beautiful scene. I'm glad I didn't forget to touch on that. That their marriage is the thing that pulls them through, because again, togetherness is more powerful. And the fact that Durin the elder is being left to his devices and does not have his son's counsel, he's not receiving Durin's words with a clear mind. But Durin's mind is still clear, and he needs to receive Disa's words, because like we've said, not just in terms of the Dwarven women culturally, but her specifically, she's been that voice in season 1. Every time that she's advocated for the friendship between him and Elrond, every time that she's advocated for listening in general, for forgiveness, the theme that we've talked about with the Ents storyline. Disa is one of the beating hearts of this show. I would say the beating hearts of this show are Disa, Nori, the Ents, Arandir. Like, there are those people that you look to as being like the emotional core, the emotional compass of what's happening. And I thought all of that was really effective. And it's sad. It's sad to see sort of Durin, the Durins, plural, have this, like, they had this falling out. Then it was like, okay, maybe we can get through it. I have this solution. Maybe he'll finally listen, and he does. But it's now I'm on the other page than what I thought I was, and it's like, God, like that breaks your heart. And now he's got his inheritance back and his title and his his gold plate and everything, and like he's Prince Durin again. Prince Durin the Fourth is back, but at what cost? Like, your dad says he's proud of you, but at what cost? He says that your idea worked and that you were right to want to team with the elves, but at what cost? Like, you're getting all these things that you wanted to hear, but they're all tainted because your father's mind is tainted, because that's not the man that you thought he was, or he is the man that you thought he was, but he's no longer capable of acting like that man, because of these outside influences. And now you're walking around feeling this level of responsibility, this internalized guilt, which is a thing shared between all the different characters. You know, that's a core theme as well. We talked about it with Arondir and the guilt he feels over Bronwyn, Theo, the guilt he feels over Bronwyn, Galadriel, the guilt that she's felt since the First Age. Elrond, the way that he has pointed out, like, he sees them all as the unknowing or perhaps sometimes knowing collaborators of Sauron, that in their desperation they're willing to play this game, and they're all carrying around these burdens now, and now Durin has his. And yeah, Joe's a great comment here. Oaths and Tolkien. It's going to come back to haunt him. The oaths always come back around. Yeah, it's like, you'd hope that it is the one that can endure, but it's like, we know that Khazad-dûm is a tragedy. Khazad-dûm is a tragedy, and there are some storylines that are headed toward good, like Galadriel. You know, she's going to become the Lady Elorian and everything. But there are some storylines that we know from the motion picture classic Fellowship of the Ring, this place is going to be a tomb one day. And it's going to be very, very sad. And lots of blood will be spilled. And God, I hope I don't have to watch a decent death in this show. I hope that I don't. I would rather she go on a forever vacation with the kids than have to watch that. But as for right now, I think, unless there's any last minute questions or anything, or any last minute thoughts or anything that I didn't touch on, for anybody watching, thanks for sticking with us. Anybody listening after the fact, let us know what you thought of episodes 4 and 5 of the show. If there's nothing that I touched on or something that I missed, let me know. Totally talk about it. I don't have to rush off this exact second, but I think that's about everything. Extra Cheddar, thanks, Alden. See you tomorrow for Any Time with Ken and Alden. Yes, excited to hear thoughts on the debate and the VMAs. Oh yeah, oh yes, yes. We have thoughts. There's a lot going on there that we will be talking about. So yeah, if you're listening to this after the fact, this recording, we do our other show, me and Ken Knapsack. Ken, who of course is the creator and executive producer of Casterly Talk, and has allowed me to keep the hosting and everything going. We do a show together. He's like just the best creative broadcast partner ever to work with. And that's Anytime with Ken and Alden, Fridays, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern. That's our life, culture, politics, comedy show, very radio style. So excited that. Chicken Pork Adobo says, I don't mind seeing the decent death. It'll be an emotional episode. It would be. I'd be depressed, but it would probably be really good drama. Joe, I enjoyed listening. Thanks. Good night. Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for stopping by. I hope to see you again next week. Have a great night. Chicken Pork Adobo, Joe, Extra Cheddar, Brendan Marr, Brandon Summers. We had Will McLean, Lauren, everybody that's joined us. Thank you so much for hanging out this episode. You can find me personally at that Alden Diaz, THATALDENDIAZ. Casterly Talk is everywhere. CASTERLY Talk. Those are across all the different social medias. All the links are also below. If you're listening on the podcast version, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I promise you're not missing a lot. There's not a huge visual component unless you want to see me talking with my hands a lot or anything like that. We're happy to have you. Either way, we appreciate it. Check out all of Ken's links down below. Check out his shows, The Blathering. Check out Force Center. My Star Wars show, Octo Radio, will be back very soon-ish. Yeah, lots of stuff going on. And we've got 3 more huge episodes of the Rings of Power Season 2, as well as more videos coming up very soon on Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, We've got the War of the Rohirrim coming to theaters in December. So we got a Lord of the Rings movie for Christmas, baby. Very excited about that. We'll be discussing all those things. And then we want to continue the fantasy expansion here. So if there's, we started as just Game of Thrones, and House of the Dragon came around. So that obviously meant 2 shows. There's going to be the 3rd show in that world, which we will definitely cover next year, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Then Rings of Power came around, and we thought, hey, why don't we cover that and make the channel more about all fantasy? And then we also covered Willow until the cruel Hollywood gods took that show away from us. But there's going to come a point, next year we'll have Night of the Seven Kingdoms. We'll have War of the Rohirrim and things. But there's going to come sort of those dry periods where I want to start maybe looking at some of these other shows. Maybe we'll check out, maybe we'll finally check out Witcher. Maybe we'll check out Wheel of Time. No promises, but there are things. There are lots of things under the fantasy umbrella that we'd like to cover. So if you have any ideas, feel free to let me know. Like I said, at any of the links below, DM us, leave a comment. Let us know your favorite thoughts. I'm excited to hear what you've thought of Rings of Power Season 2 so far. I'm excited to hear what you think about any of the ideas we've discussed, be that home or forgiveness or manipulation or hubris or any of these things. Favorite moments, standout performances, leave them in the comments, tweet them. There's been a lot of internet fighting lately and all this stuff against a lot of the bad faith and the grift and the hate and all that. And we firmly stand against that. It's not that we like everything, but like we believe in giving everything its due and unpacking these things like you would in class, like you would in a book club, like you would with your friends. Those are the conversations that we are most excited about having here on Casterly Talk, and I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited that you're a part of it, and I really appreciate you being here. So for right now, I'm going to call it a night because it has been an hour and almost 47 minutes that I've been talking nonstop. And I got to do a show tomorrow, and I'm hungry. So for right now, pour one out for Celebrimbor. This has been Casterly Talk, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next week.